government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's just our luck. We elected this dumb fuck, doesn't give a shit about us, but throw his mother under the bus. Time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crowd, tell us how you feel. Let's pull back the curtain and open the door. Get some stuff that's not bought and paid for. Let's herd border to border, coast to coast. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome into another podcast by George. Well, it's Halloween. It's the witching hour, as they say. We're coming up to Tuesday, the general election. We get to pick a president. We get to pick a U.S. senator here in the state of Iowa and on down the ballot. And there's a lot of things happening so quickly. I wanted to put this interview off until the last minute, but I didn't want to wait too long. And our interviewee today is our old friend, our old buddy, our old pal, Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science at Iowa State University. He's been teaching political science for 50 years. And even he'll say it hasn't seemed very much like what we're facing now. And the last time we talked, Doc, by the way, welcome back into a podcast by George. And I really appreciate you playing along, being a part of this now for a couple of years over that since.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure, and you always have some interesting angles on it that you don't see in much of the rest of the media. So thank you.
Well, and let's start off with an interesting angle here that isn't about the election. Now, we're going to get to that, folks, so stay tuned. But the last time we talked to the doc, they were getting ready to vote, getting ready to confirm Amy Coney Barrett. And, of course, they've done that to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm going to do a little screen share here. I don't know if the doc's seen this or not, but I've got a photograph of her. Here, there it is. Doc, does that come up on your screen?
Yeah.
For my Star Trek fan friends, they'll realize that is from the original television series Star Trek, and it kind of makes fun of the way that she looks. And leave it. My God, I'm going to make fun of the way people look. Hardly, but. The point that I make about her is this is a woman, devout Christian, that you could put her on a lie detector. She believes that a guy lived inside of a whale for 3 days and came out to talk about it, but yet isn't sure about things like climate change, as an example. Yeah. And the way that I wanted to preface this, Doc, some Democrats, some of the talking heads on MSNBC and CNN, they'll tell you that that nomination probably is more important, more significant than the election that we're about ready to have. That it could mean the end of the ACA. It could put an end to legalized abortions, overturn Roe v. Wade. It could be a huge impact for the United States of America. And I looked at this a little closer and I thought, wait a minute. Now, and I've cited this before, Kavanaugh and Garland, those two opposing U.S. Supreme Court justices that they had before, they were on a lower court bench together. They voted the same way 91% of the time. And I looked at this and I thought, why the hell didn't the Democrats oppose this more aggressively? If this is such a big deal, why didn't they do more? And some people will tell you, well, they couldn't do more. So I got to find out what's going on. Where do I go? My go-to source, The Jimmy Dore Show. Here's a really nice summary that Jimmy Dore put together. And it reads like this. The Democrats have allowed the Republicans, and now the Republicans are to blame for this, don't get me wrong, but they've allowed them to seat over 250 federal judges, fast-tracked a lot of those guys and gals, and 3 Supreme Court justices. Now, they're going to be with us for life, and they're there without a fight. And what could they have done? Well, they could have denied unanimous consent on procedural votes. They didn't do that. The Democrats could have demanded a quorum from the Republicans for process votes. They didn't do that. The Democrats could have filibustered and filed endless procedural challenges. That's something the Republicans are really good at. They know how to do that stuff. Democrats didn't do that. And Schumer even floated the idea of a Democratic Senate caucus denying the quorum because they can't do things if they don't have a quorum. They didn't do that. And of course, the thing that we talked about earlier, Doc, was that Pelosi could have coordinated the impeachment of Trump or William Barr. I didn't even think about that. I didn't know. She could have impeached either one of those guys to force the Senate into a procedural session. Now, once that happens, nothing else can take place. You can't approve a Supreme Court justice. You can't do any of that stuff. The Democrats could have done all of these things. They didn't do any of them. And I look at that, and if this is so important, if it's so significant, why didn't they at least take a shot? What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, they could have done a lot of things, and I've been told by several people that I trust in terms of their analysis that they did not want to seem that disruptive. They did not want to sort of undermine the fact that the Senate is where Supreme Court justices nominated by the president are vetted and then either voted or denied the seat. And I think their mistake was in thinking that 2020 is a normal year. It's not a normal year. Nothing that was normal before is still accepted. The Senate has given up any kind of role that it could play in balancing off the power of the president. Donald Trump is an incredibly clever individual who saw that the Constitution doesn't really limit the president's power very much. The only limitation on the president's power is really a willing House and Senate and maybe a Supreme Court that says, no, you can't do that. And he realized that they weren't going to stop him. So President Trump has truly become what we used to call the imperial president. None of the others were really that imperial. He is imperial because he's done so many things that were not done only because of courtesy and tradition and respect for institutions and stuff. And Trump got elected by being disrespectful of the status quo. I saw him say yesterday, maybe the day before, that you got to vote for me because these political parties are all corrupt and these are a bunch of corrupt politicians. He is not a Republican. And the Republican Party, to some extent, in a way, doesn't really exist anymore. It's now called the party of Donald Trump.
Well, I'll give you a brain buster here just to wrap up this little intro segment, because I want to spend the most of the time here talking about politics. But 5 of the current Supreme Court justices that we have were appointed by presidents the majority of voters in America did not vote for.
Right.
Think about that. People don't think about what's going on in this country a lot of times, but a couple of those justices were appointed after Gore lost. People say that it's a fact that he won the popular vote. The Supreme Court gave the election to Bush, and then, of course, the justices approved under the Trump administration, and he lost the popular vote. So 20% of the time in this century, by the way, the person with the most votes has not won. I mean, it's a real brain buster.
As I told you earlier before we went on, that I just did a great interview with a famous British journalist that I know very well. And they are still incomprehensible about what is the Electoral College. You mean you can win more votes but lose the election? They don't get it. It's a leftover from a period a long time ago. And it is not very democratic in that sense. So, yeah, it's an odd thing. I think that have you noticed that since the confirmation of the latest Supreme Court justice, that story has kind of disappeared.
Yes.
I don't see a lot of coverage of that anymore. And that's because there is so much turmoil. And the Trump administration is so good, as we've said many times before, at throwing all those little nuts out there. And the media goes, as squirrels they are, running after all those little nuts. And so they forget about things that are incredibly important because they're looking for exciting headlines on current things. And so we will have to wait until the new justice joins others to see exactly how she does vote. But so when they get nominated and confirmed, they're there for life. And so very often they start doing things that are different from what the president thought they would be doing. We'll see if that happens with her.
Well, and it's all politics, and it's all frightening stuff. Like I said, they've been scaring the bejabbers out of people on cable news here over that nomination for several weeks. And Nancy Pelosi herself kind of pulled back the cover on it. I mean, are they too dumb, or are they in on it? And Pelosi said, and I have to find this interview and share it with our audience, but she said that the Republicans have been talking about Roe v. Wade since the 70s. I mean, they use it as a scare tactic. They use it as leverage. They use it to get what they want. They've never pursued it. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. Well, the reverse of what she didn't know she was doing, she was also revealing herself, because the Democrats also use that, particularly when it comes to fundraising, and again, exerting leverage and mobilizing the electorate and scaring the hell out of Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and all of these people on the cable network. So, all right, I wanted to kind of reflect here a little bit. Like I mentioned here at the top, you and I have been doing this now for months, years actually. And I go back and I think about the beginnings of this election. The Russiagate thing was already underway. The silver bullet for the Democrats to get rid of Trump, they believed, was the Mueller Report. And at that time back then, I kept saying, I've looked at this. There's nothing there. This is not going to work. What the Democrats need to do is mobilize, get a candidate, and beat this guy at the ballot box. But they put all of their chips on the table on that Mueller Report. And I tell people, I felt like I was watching, Doc, you'll remember this, Geraldo Rivera uncovering the vault of Al Capone.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And there was nothing in there.
What a disappointment that was. My God, they broke through the wall. It was on live television. They went in there. There was a couple old dusty bottles down there laying on the floor. There was nothing to the Mueller Report. And of course, I think that set them back. I think it influenced the Democratic approach to the election. I said at the time, my God, there's only 3 candidates in this field they cannot nominate and win the election, and they were Buttigieg, Warren, and of course Biden. Biden gets the nomination. He carries the neoliberal flag here. He's the moderate to right-wing Democrat that they're going to put up against Donald Trump. They're going to try to get Republicans to defect enough in these swing state areas to get a Democrat elected, and then the policy changes, the programs that we'll see, who knows? That's kind of the way, that's long-winded, but that's the way I look at it. What do you think?
No, and it's true that the Democrats think, the Democrats don't think that having a super progressive like Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren is going to get them not so much Republicans as that important chunk of no party voters, people who are not registered as either Democrat or Republican. And sometimes those go this way and sometimes they go that way. And in Iowa, we depend on those to either get a Republican elected president because they swung towards Trump, or a Democrat like Obama or Bill Clinton. And so what they decided is that those no party voters are more traditional. They look towards the past more. They're not that interested in climate change and Black Lives Matter and those kinds of things. And they're counting on drawing them back. And remember, we don't have national elections. They want to draw them back in Michigan, in Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and maybe in Florida. Florida is a huge conundrum. I know Florida. I lived there for many years. I went to military school there. And what's happening in Florida all of a sudden is the Hispanic voters, the Latino, Latinx voters, they're actually very divided. Biden is not getting a big, huge surge of those, even though that's what the Democrats thought would happen. A lot of them actually like Donald Trump. The Venezuelan Americans, they like Trump because he's been yelling and screaming about, Maduro and the whole Chavez thing in Venezuela, even though I say he's had 4 years to get that fixed and he hasn't done it. So why do you think he's going to do it in the next 4 years? And some Cuban Americans are still excited about the fact that Trump is hard and tough on Cuba. And so you've got these constituencies that are all part of a big Rubik's Cube that the Democrats are trying to line up all those colors to get that, 270 electoral votes or more. And, the predictions are, you ask me what I think. Well, looking at all the polls and all the numbers, and if everything turns out the way we think it will, Joe Biden should be able to get at least 270 electoral votes and win the presidency. But then, what happens? Then you still got the question of whether the Senate is going to go to the Democrats. And that's iffy. In Iowa, we know the race for the Senate is tight, extremely tight. The Democrats may pick up a few, but they also may lose at least one Senate seat. If the Democrats win the Senate, then the question was, can they now move on and take the impeachment trial and take that and convict and fire Donald Trump? Constitutional lawyers are a little bit confused about that. I don't want to go there because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but that's an interesting speculation. Then you'll get Mike Pence as president, if Trump
perish the thought. Yeah, you want to scare a progressive.
A lot of people
yeah,
say, right, it's not a big improvement. So I want people to not freak out. Don't start driving towards the Canadian border yet. Watch all this and see, because it could turn out to be a very interesting year, a very interesting election. We always hope, don't we, that the democracy will hold together and won't fall apart. But the British journalist is in Washington, D.C. right now. And I asked him, I said, have you driven downtown in D.C.? Have you seen that most of the stores there have put up plywood on their storefronts? That's never happened before. In 50 more years that I've been observing this, never have stores boarded up before an election because they fear violence, looting, disruption. I think that's very, very daunting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting also that if you talk to people that are afraid, the Trump supporters, they're afraid that it's the Boogaloo Boys. It's the Left Antifa is going to break out and they're going to shoot everybody up if Trump wins. And I look at it as a progressive, somebody on the left, and I say if Trump loses, and I look at it on the left and I say, well, I don't think that's really what we should be afraid of. I look at it and if Trump loses, the armed militias that support Trump and all of the organizations, they're far more of them and they're far better. I think that's what we ought to be concerned about. But, that's a conversation for another day. I want to tell you one thing that struck me as you were talking and we've talked about before. I always get frustrated when I talk to observers, people that really know what they're talking about, like you, political scientists, and they'll always say, well, when it comes to elections, people vote their pocketbooks. And oh my God, are you kidding me? With everything that's going on in the world, including the fact that it's on fire, that it's melting, that we're committing genocide in Yemen, that we're involved in 7 wars around the globe, that all of the people are going to vote their household pocketbook, and they'll say, yeah, that's really what matters. Now, you talk about British reporters. I just had Chris McGreal on, the U.S. correspondent for The Guardian, and he said this is going to be a COVID referendum. That they're not going to vote their pocketbook. They're not going to vote any of those things that I just mentioned. What's going to turn this election is the response to the coronavirus. And that in particular does not appear to bode well for Donald Trump.
It's interesting. My own take on it is that here you have COVID, an enormous threat. People are dying every day. People are getting infected. People can't visit their relatives who are in nursing homes, who are dying all alone, scared to death. VA facilities, prisons, every kind of place where people congregate are in collapse. But COVID and the economy are one and the same. It's not COVID or the economy. Mm-hmm. COVID is the economy as well. And so you've got an economic and a healthcare crisis converging. And so people are going to be voting on both. Trump the other day there at this rally said inarticulately, we're going to get your husbands their jobs back. And a lot of Republicans said, yes, that was the right thing to say, because it's the guys that Trump counts on to turn out for the election. They're discounting the fact that that was not something that a lot of women could connect with, because they're also working. They've also lost their jobs, many of them. But COVID and the economy are bundled together. And the question still is, and I saw a young Cuban or Latin voter in Florida interviewed. He said, I'm voting for Donald Trump because he's a businessman, and we need a businessman to make the economy work. I thought, yeah, but he's a guy who's done bankruptcies. That's his business model. So, is that what we want? Maybe we can declare bankruptcy and wipe out the national debt. I don't know. But it is true that Trump supporters think that Biden will be an economic disaster and that Donald Trump is best for the economy. The COVID thing, yes, the COVID thing is a huge factor, obviously. But Trump's son just said, well, there aren't that many people dying, just quit talking about that. And I guess, I don't know if Trump supporters generally agree with that or not, but, a lot of people are dying from this virus. And I don't think it's true, as President Trump said, that my doctors here where I live are making up the fact that someone who dies in our hospital dies from COVID because they get paid more if a person dies from COVID than if they die from a heart attack.
Unbelievable.
Can I really mistrust my healthcare providers, whom I trust a lot, with that? I don't know if that's going to go over big, but Trump has a lot of support.
Well, and just as an aside here, a podcast by George several months ago had Megan Srinivaras, the epidemiologist from Fort Dodge, on, and she said, if we list a wrong cause of death, we can lose our license. Nobody's going to do that. And the hospitals are losing money by putting, originally they put away those elective procedures and they treated COVID patients, and they lost a lot of money doing it. That's about the dumbest argument that anybody could ever have. But I will give our Latino friends, and particularly any recent immigrant, a break. And I'll give this little story. I got a buddy of mine that hosted a foreign exchange student from Russia. And they came to Iowa, and he discovered that they were doing transactions. This might even been mail order before, online, with shysters, basically, fake diamonds, buying stuff that, you and I would see through instantly. But they weren't that familiar with the culture here. They weren't used to how people scam and steal and make up stuff. And so, you look and say, my God, are they that dumb? No, they're not that dumb. They're just not familiar with the culture. They can't spot a charlatan game show host, used car dealer. They haven't been here long enough to see through that stuff. And so, I don't want to be condescending, but in some respects, I'll give them a break along those lines. Well,
I agree with you. Let me also, could I quick add?
Yeah.
Do you ever watch cable TV?
Do I? Yeah.
I watch cable.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I don't want to watch this channel because I've seen this, so let me go to another channel. And I usually start clicking through. I don't go directly to the next one. I click through. Almost everything on cable is people selling stuff that A, you don't want, B, probably doesn't do what they say it does. And we're used to that. We're used to a sales pitch for little brown diamonds. They call them chocolate diamonds. Those are actually what are called piece of junk. It's not a chocolate diamond. It's a piece of what would have been a diamond that is turned brown, and now you're selling it as this great thing. Insurance sales ads, some of them are atrocious. Health supplies, all kinds of non-approved, non-FDA approved supplements. You talk to any doctor and they'll tell you, don't take that stuff. Number one, it hasn't been tested. We don't know the purity. Number three, it's made in India in some horrible facility that you wouldn't even take your dog into because of infection. And people are buying all this stuff. It doesn't help your health. The research is all there that it is these health supplements actually sometimes kill you, and
Yeah.
yet we're buying them.
Yeah.
Give me a break. Why aren't we going to then, scrutinize politicians and
Yes.
say, oh, is that really true? I don't believe that.
Yeah.
No, we're going to buy it. If it's sold, dynamically and with a great deal of flair, and we'll buy it. And we will buy it from any politician.
Not much of a commentary on the intellect of our fellow Americans, I guess, and you certainly
We're
don't have.
consumers.
And I don't want to make fun.
No,
The
George,
immigrants
we're
are
consumers.
Yeah.
We are consumers. We
Right.
love to buy stuff,
Anything.
including politics.
Yeah. More money than brains.
I'm about to put a couple of 9mm into my flat screen if they don't stop running those ads that they're running in Iowa, which are intolerable, screaming, yelling, Armageddon is going to come. The end of the world is going to come. Everything is going to melt away, and your doctors are going to be ripped out of their hospitals and executed in public, and all this stuff. And I'm like, do people really believe those ads?
Yeah.
What do you believe? I mean, it is sort of discouraging in a way.
Well, and the news really is just one big ad, if you think about that. And, of course, it's paid for by the same advertising. You've got the warring factions on cable news. People don't seem to realize that that's really what it is. It's professional wrestling. It's one side against the other. And which leads me to and we're out of time here. God, I saw on the Hill, and again, that's kind of a left-leaning website, Michael Moore was on there this week, Doc. I don't know if you saw that or not, but he said straight up, he talked to a congressperson, and they had told him that the Justice Department is preparing to go into Pennsylvania on election night and commandeer the election machines and the hard drives, and that Trump is not going to abdicate. He will not step down under virtually any circumstances. Michael Moore. Now, he's a filmmaker, he's a Hollywood guy, but the dude was right about weapons of mass destruction in 2003. He was right about the election in 2016. He was on the Bill Maher show and came out and said Trump's going to win. This guy's twice been shy. I mean, he's been right a couple of times.
Yeah.
Do you think it could get that hairy? Could it get that weird?
No, but a lot of people besides Michael Moore, who is not trusted by anyone who is sort of a moderate whatever, is not the only one who's afraid that that's going to happen. That we have said, the laws are so iffy in terms of what votes should be counted, when should they be counted, should they be counted 1 or 2 days after the election? And the answer is, tell me what state we're talking about, because it varies by state. This is a federalist system. Elections are run by states. Different states have different constitutional rules or legislative election laws that spell out. In some states, you can, count the votes weeks and weeks after the election legally because it's legal. And so for the government in Washington to try and set the rules is unconstitutional. It's not frightening. It's just plain unconstitutional because elections are run by states and the states decide what those rules are. It's the same thing with incumbency. In some states, you can run for re-election until you're dead of old age. And in some states, you can't because they have term limits. That's not a federal thing. The same with elections. And, your viewers, listeners, and followers need to every day remember that you cannot say nationally when votes should no longer be counted because it depends on the state.
I'm going to put, again, we're out of time. I'm just to close here on a light note, kind of a light note. I'm going to put one more thing up here on the screen.
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, so, and I just had this on the prior podcast. So, and to preface this a little bit, Doc, here's what how I feel. Okay, so we got to get rid of Trump, vote for Biden, but by God, he better change. He better get things moving. He better not do what he's done the last 50 years as a legislator, or I'm out. I have voted Democratic my entire life. I'm not going to do that again. And I'm reminded. Yeah, I talked about the history of this election, and I talked about the Mueller Report and all that. The other big thing was the Bernie Sanders candidacy. and us progressives. And I'm reminded of Evel Knievel trying to jump the Snake River, Doc. Now, you remember this as well. This was also on live television. That's how he went. As a teenager, I tuned that in to watch a guy on a motorcycle jump a chasm like that. And it wasn't a motorcycle at all. It was a little rocket. And he got on it, and he took off, and he went straight down. I mean, it was a flaming disaster. Anybody could have predicted it, basically, but everybody was interested in it. And that's what Sanders did with the progressives, trying to win an election from within the Democratic Party. It's not going to work. That's not going to happen. If we're going to get what we need and want in this country, and if it doesn't come through Joe Biden, and if we have enough time left, particularly with the climate, we're going to have to do something different in 2024 and beyond. That's the way I feel about it. And again, I'll give you the last word, Doc, as we got to wrap up.
No, that's probably true. It's probably true, but you notice that the Green Party and the Libertarian Party and others have tried that, and they've put up candidates, and people have voted for them. There is no structure for a really robust majority or plurality third party in enough of the states to harvest the electoral votes. And so it's going to take a very, very aggressive, imaginative, successful, and very wealthy initiative to create a real third party that gives an alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. And, you know, we're one of the few countries in the world that only has two parties. In most countries, there are more. There are, you know, in Europe, there are all kinds of political parties, and often the government is a coalition of several parties, and sometimes it's the progressives that have the coalition, other times it's the conservatives. And it is possible, state by state, to elect maybe people who are senators and House members who come from, not from the Democrats and Republicans, but who come from other parties, and who force a compromise and negotiation when it comes to creating, you know, the policies that come out of Washington. That's the best route that I see for alternative parties to be successful. At the presidential level, man, that's really tough.
Well, I fell in line. I mean, I was almost a swing state at this point. I held my nose and grabbed my toes, and I did it one more time. But I'm going to be hard-pressed to do it again in 2024. Doc, thanks again. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you working with us here as we come up to the 2020 election. And we'll check in with you here right afterwards to see where we're at, what the lay of the landscape is, because this is going to be something like I've never seen before, and perhaps you haven't either.
I have not, and I hope there's a good internet connection to wherever I flee to.
Absolutely, folks. That's Dr. Stephan W. Schmidt.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he's great in the classroom. He's great on the podcast because, as you can see and as you've just heard, he is a guy that can put things into a real-world context, make things lighthearted and interesting, yet knows what he's talking about on very serious topics, mostly political science and the world as we know it here in the United States. That's going to wrap it up. That's going to be our last show, I think, here before we come up to the election. We'll see you on the other side, not in a Jim Morrison way, but in a podcast by George way. And if you like us, please check us out on Facebook. You can like us there. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can like us there and hit the notification bell so that you get notified of future podcasts. And, of course, we're on Spotify and iTunes and all those places where podcasts are seen or heard. That's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. There ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.